The NHL Central Division is littered with bona fide Stanley Cup contenders. On today's episode, Hunter and I break down who's going to come out on top.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Locked On NHL. I am your host, Nick Zararis. That is Hunter Hodies. We want to thank everyone who's making Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So today's episode, we're going to take a walk down the road talking about the NHL Central Division, some real bona fide Stanley Cup contenders in this midst, a few teams that probably push for a playoff spot, be relatively close to that bubble, and then a few teams that are still kind of in the woods figuring out what they want to be. Hunter, how are we doing today?
Doing good, man. If my connection's a little bit spotty for those watching on YouTube, it's because I'm out of the country in Aruba, just with my family until tomorrow. I've been here for the last 6 days, so it's been a lot of fun. But hey, I couldn't miss this show. We're previewing division by division. We got content to do. I'm excited to go through the Central Division with you, buddy.
Hey, man, you and I are... Unfortunately, we will always be high on the Dallas Stars because we believe in the vision. So you had to be here today. All right. So we start out number 8. We both have the same team, number 8. I understand people are a little bit more optimistic about the Blackhawks this year, but the counterpoint to that is they have 2 B tandem goalies as their goalie tandem. They have 2 passable NHL defensemen. And then once you get past their top 6, it's very light. This is better than what they were last year, but their goal isn't to really make a lot of divisional progress. I would say their biggest goal is just getting more ice time for their guys, getting them reps and getting them closer to that. Next year, we can have a legitimate conversation about them pushing for a playoff spot.
I agree. And Nick, I really like the additions that they made to the forward group over the offseason. I mean, getting back Teravainen, I think that's a big move for them for now and especially the future. Getting Tyler Bertuzzi, a bona fide top 6 winger, I think that's a really good move by Chicago. You have Athanasiou coming back. Also, another big addition who barely played last year, Taylor Hall. I mean, he only played 10 games last year before getting hurt. So I think his addition to the top 6 for a full year is going to be great. Connor Bedard, second full season in the NHL. If he doesn't get hurt, I expect big things out of him. Even their third line, Jason Dickinson, I think is fine for a bottom 6 player. Nick Foligno is still fine at this point. Mikheyev could potentially bounce back. Their fourth line, it's not really much Brett Holmbout, but I agree defensively, I need to see a little bit more there. Goalies, I do like them getting Brossoit alongside Peter Mrazek, but you said it. They're kind of B-tier goalies at this point. I think with Chicago, the big thing for them is, just showing progress for this year. And then next year, we can maybe have a conversation about them potentially, sneaking their way into the playoffs. But I still think, in my opinion, they're a couple years away from getting back to the playoffs overall. So Chicago, number 8, but I expect them to still be better this year.
I said their goal should be to push for 25 to 30 wins. They've won 22, 23 games the last handful of seasons. If they get close to 30 wins, 75-ish standings points, that would be a good season for them and a sign they're going in the right direction. They don't need to make a ton of progress all at once, but start making incremental progress so that way you don't end up in a situation like Buffalo, Ottawa, or Detroit where it's all or nothing because you waited so long to really push to break through and you just never have. So after Chicago, we both have Utah. I think Utah is really good on paper. I just don't know what to expect from them, and that's why I have them behind Minnesota and St. Louis. I think Utah's defense should be a lot better. I think their forward group has a lot of potential. When you look at the number of high picks in that top 9 especially, at least 2 or 3 of those guys have to break through eventually. So based on just probability, at least 2 or 3 of those young Utah forwards, whether it's Cooley, whether it's McKelly, whoever, 2 or 3 of those guys are going to have exciting, fun seasons this year. It's just we got to see it. They're putting it together. And I will say, and I said this the other day to somebody talking about them, I do think not having the looming arena and relocation issues hanging over the team will help. I do think the fact that those guys can feel a bit more confident that their efforts are going to be rewarded and that their ownership takes them seriously. I do think that matters, and I do think that will help. I just want to see it. Because in theory, I could see a world where they're better than Minnesota and St. Louis.
I definitely could too. And I love the moves they made, especially defensively over the offseason here. I mean, you get Mikhail Sergachev from the Lightning. He's a bona fide top pairing defenseman. He's going to make an impact right away, especially pairing him with someone like Sean Durzi. I think, Nick, that has the potential to be one of the most underrated top pairings in the league. You bring in John Marino from New Jersey. He's a pretty solid number 4 in today's NHL. You have Ian Cole there as well. Forwards-wise, I agree. There's a lot of intrigue here. I want to see Clayton Keller have another strong year. I'm really excited about Logan Cooley. Nick Schmaltz is a very good right winger. Dylan Gunther, I want to see more out of him this year as well. There's definitely a lot of intrigue here forward-wise. And heck, even goaltending-wise with Vejmelka, and Connor Ingram, I do also think that's kind of, in the B tier of goalies, but it's still very much passable. I think Utah can definitely push for a playoff spot this year. Even though I have them number 7, I still think they have the potential to push for a playoff spot if everything goes right for them this year. I like what you brought about the ownership group. This is a ownership group that very much, I think, cares about this team. You saw it over the offseason with how much money they were wanting to dish out to players, the trades they made, how aggressive they were. They want to win right away. It may not be this year, but I think it's coming eventually. I know I'm a little bit down on them this year, but I still could see them, making a push, to make the playoffs this year if everything does go right.
We both have the same team in the next spot as well. We can squeeze them in before our first break. We both have the Minnesota Wild, who I like them in theory. The goalie room terrifies me. You have no idea if Jared Spurgeon is going to be healthy, and if he's healthy, if he's going to be effective. You're asking a lot of Kirill Kaprizov, Ryan Hartman, and Matt Zuccarello. You had a nice season from Matt Boldy last year. It would go a long way in bolstering their chances of being a good team if Marco Rossi really took a step forward. He's somebody I've been very high on. He's had an arduous path to just get to the NHL, dealing with long COVID, missing almost 2 full years of playing hockey, and to still kind of be on the precipice of maybe a major breakthrough. And the thing that's interesting about the Wild is we get another year or 2 into the future, they're going to actually be able to start making some moves and be back in the mix as far as trades and big free agents. And then you can start to bolster that Faber, Kaprizov, Matt Boldy wave of players. Because right now, that marriage of the Zuccarello, Eriksson, Ek, Hartman to the younger group, it's kind of just hanging on at this point. Like, Zuccarello is still pretty good. Hartman is still pretty good. But they're on the older end of things. And once that next wave of Wild players comes in support of Kaprizov, then I think they're ready to take a step. But until I see that goalie room give me something to believe in, Gustafsson and Fleury just weren't good last year.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the Wild, those cap recaptures have really affected them these last 12 years. And I think once those are done, Billy Guerin will have a lot more money to spend. And then I think he'll be able to support this core, especially if Kaprizov and Faber. I expect big things out of Kaprizov again this year. I think Kaprizov and Faber alone will have them in the mix. I think they will keep them in the playoff mix throughout the season. I just don't think they have enough horses to get in when I look at the other teams in the Central Division. Again, I am really high on Kaprizov. I love Brock Faber. I love the contract that Faber got over the offseason. I love Eriksson Ek. He's one of the best two-way centers in the NHL. I do expect good things from Marco Rossi this year. I've always been high on him as well. I do think he's going to take another step forward this year. You talked about Boldy. I expect good things from him this year as well. But, up and down this lineup, there still needs to be, I think, another high impact player added. They just don't have that player there right now. So Minnesota have them number 6, but again, I still expect them to be in the playoff hunt throughout the season. I just don't think they're going to get in.
One last question for you before we go, because this actually fits. Right now, if you were going into this upcoming NHL season, would you rather have Brock Faber or Luke Hughes?
Wow. I think I'd go Brock Faber.
Who do you think ends up having the better career?
Better career. See, I'm still going to go Faber for that. I was so impressed by the way he played last year. He very much earned that contract. Just the plays that he's able to make with the puck on his stick just blew me away. And I love Luke Hughes. I think he's going to be a great defenseman, but give me Faber right now. And I do think, hopefully this doesn't age like milk. I think he's going to go on to have the better career. Are you the opposite of me?
No, I agree with you. I think Faber is going to be better. I think Luke, the one concern I have is the same concern I have for Jack, is he can't stay healthy because he's a smaller guy. If Luke strings together a couple of 75 plus game seasons, then that concern goes away. And over time, I do imagine he's going to end up on a first pair with Simon Nemec at some point, 2, 3, 4 years down the road. And that could potentially be one of the best pairs in the entire league. So there's a lot up in the air, but that's the fun type of question you get to do when you're doing your preseason power ranking show. We're going to take our first quick break of the episode, and we will be right back and keep making our way through the Central Division. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you now. Through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment you can cancel anytime. If you're like me and Hunter, football has been a very welcome reprieve from day-to-day life. Tonight, Thursday Night Football, the Patriots going to MetLife Stadium to take on Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. The Patriots, 6.5-point road dogs. Me and my friends were talking about it. We're going to be in on the Patriots tonight in a very ugly game to bet. The Giants taking on the Browns at plus 6.5 as a road favorite. The Chargers playing Hunter Steelers. The Steelers 1.5-point home favorites. If you want to get in on the action and have a little bit more fun this weekend watching football, visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL as we make our way through another divisional preview. Next up, this is a team I am having a hard time getting a handle on. We both have St. Louis in this spot, and then our lists start to diverge. I feel that St. Louis has the potential to be annoying. You saw how good they were able to play when they changed to their interim coach, Drew Bannister. They tightened up defensively. They got a little bit more out of some of their top 6 guys. Their forward group is solid. It's their back end that gives me a lot of pause. And you got to see if Binnington can do it again, because last year was the first year in 2 or 3 seasons where Binnington was genuinely good. Binnington was probably the 6th or 7th best goalie in the entire league last year. If he can be that good and the forwards can score enough to mitigate their defensive issues, they'll absolutely hang around. You know, they were the first team out of the playoffs last year. I want to say they were 7 points back of Vegas in that final playoff spot last year, but they will hang around this year.
Yeah, I think the Blues, and last season was Binnington's, I think, his best year since 2019, by far, in my opinion. Yeah. That was the best he had played since the Blues won the Stanley Cup. And you saw it. He was able to drag that team into the fight on a nightly basis. If he's able to do that again this year, the Blues will very much be in the race again this season. I really like the moves that the Blues made to offer sheet Holloway and Broberg from Edmonton. They targeted a team that was in salary cap hell this year, and they were able to get both of them. The Oilers did not match either offer sheet, so Holloway looks like he's going to slot in on the third line. Broberg, I think, is going to be on the second pairing. And yeah, Nick, defensively, there's just, I'm not confident in this Blues defensive group. I mean, Nick Leddy might be on the top pairing this year, and I like Nick Leddy, but I don't think he's a top pairing defenseman at this point.
He's 36 years old. On no planet is Nick Leddy a first pair defenseman.
No, he's not. I think he's fine on a second or a third pair, but as your top pair, I get a lot of questions overall. Colton Parayko, bona fide #1 in this league, in my opinion. Justin Falk, I think, is especially good on the power play. I think his 5-on-5 metrics have been decent these last couple of years. Ryan Suter, I think, is a good buy low candidate for them. He can play on the third pair. He can play on the second pair. Forward wise, yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the better forward groups in the league. Pavel Buchnevich, I think, is going to have another great year. Nick, I know you're probably still a little bit triggered by that trade, but Buchnevich is going to be very good for St. Louis. Again, Brandon Saad, Braden Shen, Jordan Kyrou, who I'm very high on again this year. Robert Thomas, also one of the more underrated top-line centers in the league, one of the best two-way centers in the league as well. I think the Blues are very much going to be in the race, but I'm not sure they're going to be able to beat out one of the top 4 teams that we have heading into the season in this division. But at the very least, before Doug Armstrong hands the keys over to Alexander Steen, which I can't believe he's going to be the GM, by the way. I think we're both getting old at this point.
We're really so old.
I think at the very least, he wants his team being pretty competitive by the time Steen takes over pretty soon.
That's the goal. You want, and it's hard to stick that landing to go from that older group, that wave of guys who won the Stanley Cup or got there right after they won the Stanley Cup, to that next group, because Thomas, Kyrou, Buchnevich, they drafted Jake Neighbors in the first round relatively high a couple years ago. That group is a solid foundation. Binnington is not that old where you need to start worrying about a long-term replacement yet. But they haven't been able to figure out the back end, since they got Falk, they tried Torrey Krug. They've really tried to piece together a back end over the last handful of seasons, and it just hasn't worked for them. It's hard when you're constantly shopping in the bargain bin, trying to find guys to fill out your defense, because when you have that much turnover, guys can't find a connection with each other.
Absence is going to be really felt throughout the season, especially on the power play. That's a big loss for them.
He hasn't played very well since he's been there, but the execution of the move made sense at the time. I understood what they were trying to do, and that's kind of a case of good process, bad results, which does happen. That is part of the risk of being a playoff team and trying to maintain being a playoff team over a prolonged period of time. Okay, now it's time for where our lists start to diverge. I've already gotten quite a bit of flack for where I have the Avalanche. I have them fourth going into the upcoming NHL season. And I'm going to go, we're going to take our break, and then Hunter is going to tell me why I'm wrong because he doesn't have the Avalanche in that spot. But it's very simple. The Avalanche are going into this upcoming season with no idea when Landeskog is going to be able to return and how effective he's going to be when he returns. Valerie Nichushkin is ineligible to return until mid-December. You have no idea if A, he's going to play, B, how effective he's going to be when he plays. Number 3, Arturi Lehkonen had shoulder surgery. He is not expected to start the regular season on time. This is a team that is relying on Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar, Mikko Rantanen, and Devon Toews. Don't get me wrong, those are 4 of the 30 best players in the entire world, but they can't play every game. They can't play every minute of the game, and their bottom 6 is just, it's not nearly as good as it was a few years ago. I'm still waiting for Georgiev to turn into a pumpkin because he's just not this good. Frankly, he's not. I've watched a lot of Alexander Georgiev over the years, and he stacked a lot of wins on the Avalanche. His numbers were not great last year. I struggle to see a world where they miss the playoffs entirely, but I think it's going to be very reminiscent of what Vegas was last year, where the injuries had them playing their way into the playoffs, basically up until the last 2 weeks of the season, and then St. Louis lost in a few in a row, and Vegas was able to pull away. That's kind of what I envisioned for Colorado. I think they're going to have a hard time this year. And it's not necessarily that I think Winnipeg is all that much better than them or Nashville. It's that I think those teams have relatively defined paths. Whereas Colorado, we are asking a lot of questions because you look at that top 6 right now. We're talking about Jonathan Drouin. We're talking about Miles Wood. We're talking about Nikolai Kovalenko. There's a lot of question marks in that top 6. You're talking about a third line of Joel Kiviranta, Ross Colton, and Logan O'Connor. And then that fourth line is, 2 AHLers and Joe Kelly. I think the Avalanche will be okay because those guys are really good, the 4 players I talked about at the outset. But I worry about what happens if one of those guys gets hurt. And I worry about how hard it's going to be to ride those guys for 2-3 months to get them into the mix. They're good enough to get there and be in the playoffs, but I really think the ceiling isn't nearly as high as it's been because they don't have depth anymore. They are a really top-heavy team.
I think all those points are fair, and I'm going to argue against that once I get to the Avalanche a bit later, just because I am fully riding with their top guns. But I will say, you do make very fair points when you look at their depth, the injuries that they have, etc. Number 4 on my list, this may surprise you and some people, I have Winnipeg here. I'm sorry, I got to see it again. Everything went right for the Jets last year. Connor Hellebuck was God once again. I expect him to be God again this year, but even outside of that, you got great production from someone like Mark Scheifele, 25 goals, 72 points in 74 games. Josh Morrissey established himself as a top pairing defenseman. I think he's been a top pairing defenseman for a little bit, but he became a bona fide number 1 last year. I think potentially one of the 10 best defensemen in the league. Kyle Connor, he was a 30-goal scorer last year. Nikolai Ehlers had almost 30. Cole Perfetti was very good. You had Gabe Vilardi had 22 goals last year. Their forward depth really shined throughout this past season. But again, Nick, I got to see it again. When everything goes right for you, when really not many people were expecting it, I want to see if that was just a mirage or if this is for real. I think the Jets will make the playoffs this year. I have them as a playoff team. I still don't think, though, that they're in that true contender status when I look at some of the other teams in this division, some of the other teams around the league as well. I think they can definitely give teams fights in the playoffs, but I still have them number 4 in the division right now. I know that's going to ruffle some feathers, but again, one more time, I got to see it.
That's very fair. We're going to take one more quick break. We're going to come back. Hunter's going to tell me why I'm wrong about the Avalanche, and we'll round out the rest of the Central Division. So be sure to stick around. If you're like me, you are clinging on to the last vestiges of summer best you can. I will be at Citi Field tonight to take on the Mets, and I got my tickets. The only place I get tickets from our friends over at Gametime, with some of the best features in the ticket buying experience, things like Gametime picks that make curation easier to save more on sports, comedy, and theater. All-in pricing where you toggle the feature on up front, and there are no surprise fees at checkout. The panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. You're going to a baseball game. You want to be able to see home plate. You want to be able to tell balls and strikes. You want to be able to see the ball in play. The panoramic view, most important part of the experience for me. The lowest price guarantee or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. And Gametime ticket coverage, where your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Time is it? Gametime. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL as Hunter and I make our way through the divisions, set the table up. We are right on pace to finish our divisional previews the week the NHL regular season starts, to get you guys all ready to go. All right. I'm going to let you talk about the Avalanche first, because then I'm going to talk about Nashville. So the floor is yours.
Okay. So just so everyone knows, I have Nashville number 3, and then I have Colorado number 2. I am still super high on this Avalanche team, and it's for one main reason, people. Their core. I mean, Nathan McKinnon's coming off a 140-point season. Mikko Ranson just had another 100-point season. Cale Makar is the best defenseman on the planet. Those 3, I understand they can't play every single shift, but they can still impact the game every time they're out there. And you saw that during the playoffs this year where, yeah, they lost a crazy game 1 against the Jets, but after that, excuse my language here, Nick, they kicked the Jets' asses those next 4 games. I mean, the Avalanche just went in there and they were a buzzsaw the rest of that series. And I am just super high on that core just because they know what it takes during the regular season. They know what it takes during the playoffs. They're all going to be great this year. Devon Toews especially as well. You said it. They're some of the 30 best players in the league. I mean, for God's sakes, Makar is the best defenseman on the planet. McKinnon, I think, is the second best player in the world behind Connor McDavid. That alone, that core group, I think, is going to be enough to have them finish top 3 in this division. I think Georgiev is going to have at least an average season, which if he's average, will be totally fine. But I think some people also miss, how good Drouin was this past year. 19 goals, 56 points in 79 games. If he repeats that production, that's a good player to have on your second or third line. Yes, I understand there's no Nichushkin for a bit, and who knows if he's going to play this year, but if he's able to come back, that's also big for the Avalanche. You also have Ross Colton, who he was the subject of trade rumors, didn't get traded, but he still had a 17-goal, 40-point season this past year. They're going to get Lehkonen back at some point. That's going to be big for them as well. Miles Wood was a good depth piece. Even defensively, outside of Makar and Toews, I like their second pairing of Girard and Manson. I think that's one of the more underrated second pairings in the league, in my opinion. I love the addition also of Shellington to that lineup. I think he's going to be really good in a third pairing role. And again, I understand there are depth concerns for this team, but I still think their high-end guys are going to be great. They're going to get good contributions from some of the other players in the lineup. I didn't even mention Casey Middlestat, who I think is finally the answer to their second-line center problems. This team is going to be fine, and I do think you're going to see this Colorado front office, which is very forward-thinking. They're going to make a move or two during the season to help this team get into the playoffs and make another run. That's why I have Colorado number 2 on my list for the Central Division.
All right, so this ultimately came down for me who I trust more between Nashville and Colorado. I know it sounds crazy to say this, but Nashville has pulled a playoff spot out of nowhere 2 years in a row, entirely on vibes, entirely on guys who nobody knows. You ask a random person on the street who Tommy Novak is, they're going to say it's a middle reliever on the Mets. There are a lot of people who are going to say, Philip Tomasino? Who's that? You know, the Nashville Predators have been able to make the playoffs with effectively 5 good forwards and 2 good defensemen for the last 2 years. Now you're telling me we're going to have a bona fide top 6 that's genuinely, like, really good. I don't think people realize how good of a season Philip Forsberg had last year. He was one of the best players in the entire league. It's just he's in a smaller market. You know, I think it was 47 or 48 goals. You have Novak, Stamkos, Marchessault, solid. Ryan O'Reilly, Forsberg, Gus Nyquist, who had a really nice season for them, really solid. They have a little bit more depth through the middle of their lineup now. You have Sissons playing in a bottom 6 role as opposed to a top 6. My only real question mark for Nashville is their back end. If Shea and Roman Josi play together, that puts a lot on the plate of Alex Carrier and Jeremy Lauzon, neither of whom I think really is a second pair guy, both more of third pairs. But I think Nashville also having the goalie trump card is ultimately what made me feel more comfortable about them. I think Colorado absolutely has a higher ceiling, but I would argue, at least right now, as we sit going into the season, I think Nashville has a slightly higher floor because their roster is a bit more defined and I know what I'm going to get. Whereas Colorado, I am gambling. And don't get me wrong, if I had to guess, I think Landeskog's going to be fine. I think he'll probably play 60-something games at 70-something games, probably be 40 to 50 points. It'll take a while for him to get back up to game speed. We see this all the time. But 2 years is a long time. And Nichushkin, you don't know what kind of deal he's going to be if and when he comes back. So Nashville, for me right now, feels a bit safer. Of course, you can lose playing it safe, as we see in the draft every year. Playing it safe does not necessarily correlate to better results. Back to you. Tell me about your third team.
So, yeah, I do have Nashville there. I will ask you a question, though. Fully healthy, playoff series, Colorado, Nashville. Who are you taking?
Probably Colorado, but again, you don't know who's healthy or not. Yeah. Right now, yeah, you're right. You're 100% right. Colorado, if they're fully healthy, they're a better team, but I have no idea because these aren't like normal injury circumstances.
No, I know. I was just wanted to ask, like, if Nichushkin is ready to go to the playoffs, if Landeskog is
Nichushkin was leading the playoffs in goals through 7 or 8 games last year.
He was tremendous for the Avs last year, and if they're able to get Landeskog back healthy, and he's at least potentially close to what he was even a couple of years ago, that's going to put the Avs over, again, quite a few teams in the league overall. I would take the Avs in the playoff series over Nashville fully healthy. I have Nashville third overall. I definitely think they are a playoff lock this year, in my opinion. I loved how aggressive Barry Trotz was this offseason. It honestly felt like it came out of nowhere. I just didn't think Nashville was going to be this aggressive, but I think it's just Trotz saying, okay, we want to add to this already established core and try to get them the Stanley Cup before they get a bit up there in age. Ryan O'Reilly, I mean, he's been there, done that, but he's still, at least to me, a top line center in the league. You have Gustav Nyquist, who had a good year last year. I agree with you about Forsberg, man. I don't think enough people realized just how great of a goal scorer he was last year. One of the best goal scorers in the league during the 23-24 season. I expect that to continue. You add Stamkos to this top 6, who's great at 5-on-5, especially on the power play. Cool, I hope Josi keeps feeding Stamkos one-timers on that power play, man. That's going to be a lot of fun to watch throughout the season. You have Jonathan Marchessault sign that big contract. Again, another option at 5-on-5 and on the power play. Agree with you about Colton Sissons. Outside of that, though, I mean, the bottom 6, it's fine. I don't think it's world-changing or anything like that, but I think it's still passable. Defensively, I think Brady Shea, gets that long-term contract. I don't think he's a bona fide number 2 in the NHL right now. In my opinion, I think he's better suited as a number 3 on a contender, but I still think he'll be mostly fine next to Roman Josi, who is one of the 5 best defensemen on the planet. You have UC Zararis locked up long-term. You figured out the Askarov situation. You have Scott Wedgwood, a capable backup behind him. Nashville, very much a playoff team. I just worry because I have the number 3. I think they're going to get Dallas or Colorado, in my opinion, in the first round. But when both are healthy, I just don't like those matchups for Nashville.
All right. So that leaves me with one team to talk about on my list because I've spent ample time talking about Colorado and Nashville. We both know I have Dallas first. The reason I have Winnipeg where I have them, the goaltending, and I think, and this is me suppositioning. I think this is the year Winnipeg finally starts integrating their young players and relatively successfully. You mentioned Cole Perfetti. I know Ville Heinola is hurt. He's always hurt. But if he plays, if they play, if Cade Yeager plays, if he forces his way into the team, there are enough young players that I feel like Winnipeg can offset the talent they lost because we can be objective. They lost a lot of talent. Monahan was really good for them. Yep. He was a really good addition. Tyler Toffoli was a nice addition for them at the deadline from the Devils. They've definitely lost some talent. You know, you look at that lineup and see Vlad Nemesnikov on the second line, you're going to double take a little bit. But Winnipeg has always been a depth-based team where their top nine really functions well and that all of the lines really have similar possession metrics. They do a similar job of playing at a baseline level so that they can roll the lines evenly. They're not very matchup dependent. I trust their defense. I trust Josh Morrissey. I trust Connor Hellebuck. I can trust Dylan DeMello enough. Sandberg, I would like to see a little bit more from. I still can't believe they're playing Logan Stanley, but the Jets have enough where I feel they are safe. Again, very similarly to what I said about Nashville, their ceiling is not that high in relation to some of these other teams, but I do think they have a very high floor because of their depth and because of their goaltending.
No, and those are all very fair points. Again, I expect Winnipeg to make the playoffs this year because of some of their high-end talent, because especially of Hellebuck and how he's arguably the best goaltender on the planet right now. I'm just not sure how deep they're going to go because I feel like they might get a matchup where they could get their butts kicked again like they did against Colorado when Colorado was, mostly at full health at that time during that playoff series. Number one, I have the same team as you there, the Dallas Stars. I mean, you look up and down this team. I mean, the forward depth is, I think, by far the best in the league. I mean, your top line, Jason Robertson, Rupe Hintz, Wyatt Johnston, you have a bunch of youth there, a bunch of speed, a lot of goal scoring ability, a lot of great two-way play. That's just a great top line. Up after that, you got Matt Duchene, Tyler Seguin, who's still playing very well, Mason Marchment. You can have Jamie Benn on the third line. That's a luxury that not a lot of teams can have in today's NHL. Stan Coven, who I think is going to be great this year for a full season. That's going to be awesome. You have the Donald there, Sam Steele. I just love that forward group. And then defensively, Thomas, Harley, Miro, Heiskanen. I mean, that is just one hell of a top pairing. With how great Harley was last year, with how great Heiskanen is now, he's already a top 10 defenseman in the league today. In my opinion, you have S.L. Lindell on the second pairing. You bring in Dumba. There's really no, I feel like at least, true weakness on this team. Ottinger, he'll be at least average, if not above average this year, in my opinion. I think when he's on top of his game, I don't think there are 10 better goalies in the league. He just has to be at that level on a consistent basis for this team, I think, to win in the playoffs. But the Stars, they're number one heading into the season for me for the Central Division. I expect them to get first in this division. It's all about now finally just going on that long, deep run, getting to a final, and then winning it because they have the team on paper to do it. It's all about doing it now when the games count.
Dallas, I don't want to fall into the Carolina trap. That is my concern.
Yep.
Where Dallas has great underlying numbers every year. They are really good in the regular season. And then they get to a playoff series against a team with real big dogs. And that's what happened to them last year. They played relatively well against Edmonton in that series, but Edmonton's big guys were just that little bit better than their best guys. And that was the deciding factor. I think Dallas is more than talented enough to go on a deep run. They were really interesting and aggressive at the deadline. I liked the moves they made. Adding Tanev was essential. They were able to promote Stankoven. Wyatt Johnston was one of the best players in the entire playoffs last year. Yep. That's somebody who they have in the pipeline. They have him. They have Harley. They have Logan Stankoven. They have Steele, who you mentioned. This Dallas team, they have the talent. I just don't know if their combination of talent is particularly well suited for their aspirations. You can be a talented team, but if the pieces don't fit all together in the right way, you're not going to be able to meet your ceiling. And I have Dallas first, obviously, as well. I think Dallas has an argument as the best team in the entire NHL going into this upcoming NHL season. It's simply a matter of, can they put it together? And when they're in a best of 7 against a really good team, is it going to come down to a coin flip like it did against Edmonton? Or are they going to be able to take control a little bit? So we'll see. I know it was reported the other day that Jason Robertson had off-season surgery and he might not start the preseason on time. So that's something to monitor as well. But that will just about do it for today's edition of the Locked On NHL Central Division Preview. Hunter and I will be back next week to tackle the Atlantic. We will see you guys then.